guys, so we're going to finish up chapter 6. So the first topic we're going to talk about is disconfirmation and confirmation. And then we will be talking a little bit about how to use verbal messages more effectively. After I've posted this video, you'll need to watch part 1. Make sure you watch part 1 and part 2. And then I will also post an assignment to Blackboard that will include the vocab words and a couple questions I want you to answer. So since today is April 1st, that means you need to turn it in by April 4th. April 4th, okay? So that would be Sunday. No, Saturday. Sorry, y'all, I'm losing track of the days. So disconfirmation and confirmation is the first thing we're going to talk about. So disconfirmation, which is this first term up here, disconfirmation is when you ignore someone's presence as well as that person's message. So an extreme example of this would be how if you decide to leave the Amish community, you'd be shunned. They're completely rejecting your presence and your messages. This is different than our second term, which is rejection. Rejection is when you disagree with a person and you indicate your unwillingness to change your opinion to theirs. So this is basically the easiest way to kind of differentiate between the two is that when you're disconfirming someone, you are denying that person's significance. So this would be if someone has a preferred name. Maybe they have a unique gender identity or a different gender identity, and they choose to change that name. If you choose to not acknowledge that name, then that would be an example of disconfirming them. You are denying their significance and not counting them. And then confirmation is when this is what I hope most of us are doing, is you're acknowledging the presence of another person, their importance, and you're accepting of that person. So these are 3 terms you're going to need to be able to differentiate from. Next, I'm going to talk about some of the ways that we disconfirm people. So, hold on, let me grab a thing to wipe my board off of. Maybe. Maybe not. Okay, so it looks like I'm just going to be wiping it off with my hand. So, some ways that we disconfirm people, the first is through racism. So I'm sure most of us know what racism is, but this is when we use racist language, that is language that explicitly or implicitly places an ethnic group or race in an inferior position. And racism exists on 2 different levels. It exists on an individual level, and this is the negative attitudes and beliefs that a specific person or specific group of people have about other people. So this is basically when an individual holds a belief that is racist. And then there's what's called institutional racism. And institutional racism is when there is something within an organization that is deliberately racist. So an example of this would be taking the United States as an organization when segregation was legal. That was called institutional racism because it was being instituted by the organization. Segregation, if people are unwilling to hire people of different races, that kind of thing. So how do we become less racist? So the ideas that the book gives us is avoid using derogatory terms. I think we should never use derogatory terms and always be trying to build people up. So let's not use racist language. There are sometimes stereotypes. Again, not playing into stereotypes is really important. And not referring to race when it's irrelevant. So now, if someone is the first African American surgeon, then that might be important, a fact to know, if they're a first of some kind. But if you're just talking about your friend and you're like, oh, they're an African American student, does that necessarily have relevance? You should only refer to someone's race when it's directly relevant to the conversation. And then also avoid attributing social or economic problems to specific races. So for example, right now, there is some kind of Asian, there's some prejudice against Asians because that is where in Asia is where the coronavirus it originated in Wuhan, China. So it wasn't while it started there, it wasn't, Asian people aren't the people infecting everyone. We're all infecting each other, which I hope you're staying home, washing your hands, things like that. But that would be an example of something not to do, is attributing that problem or placing the blame on all Asians because this virus happened to originate there. The next is heterosexism. So this involves when we we deny the existence of alternative sexual orientations. So that anything that does not fall under a heterosexual male-female relationship, we might consider those behaviors to be different than what we are. And so not acknowledging that other people like those behaviors or observe those behaviors is heterosexism. This is also things like anti-gay violence, gay bashing, all things like that are very dangerous beliefs and lead to us not accepting others as we could. So again, using derogatory terms, kind of a no-no, as well as, you don't have to acknowledge someone's sexual orientation. You would not call me a straight professor. You would just say I'm a professor or instructor. Now, if someone is gay, are you going to say they're a gay instructor? You might, but there's no reason to attack their sexual orientation on there. And the other one is that you should never assume someone's sexuality. When you're in conversations with people, you never know what others' preferences are or what they're going through, and so you should never assume that you know what someone's either background is or their sexual orientation, things like that. And quick shout out, I just got a new sweatshirt, and it kind of goes with today's lesson, but be kind, for you never know what battles others are fighting. So just think about that. The next one we have is ageism. So ageism refers to prejudice against other age groups. So we commonly see this with the elderly as well as the young. So people might, because you're younger, they might look down upon you, or you might think that you get passed over for a job because you're too young for it. That would be an example of ageist on the younger side, but more commonly we see this on the older side with elderly people. And so if you are watching movies, watching TV while you're during this quarantine, I want you to think about how elderly people are portrayed. A lot of times they're portrayed as incapable or feeble or stupid, and in real life, that's not really what most old people are. Now, there are old people that have mental illnesses, dementia, Alzheimer's, and that's really scary, and that's a medical diagnosis. But for the most general population of elderly people, they function just as us. They just have lived here longer. And so I'm using terms like old hag, old timer, over the hill, little old lady. It's really kind of offensive. You're kind of making fun of that person for living longer than you, when really they have a whole wealth of knowledge and experiences. Another thing is that a lot of times when we're around old people, we tend to lower our language, the complexity of our language, so we might kind of be talking down to them, as well as you should never assume an elderly person has a hearing impairment, because a lot of times, I know I make fun of my mom whenever she's on the phone with older people. She always uses a really, really loud voice, and because she thinks that they can't hear her. And so that's not necessarily always the case. Now, sometimes it is, but normally if you just speak in a regular level, if someone can't hear you, they're most likely going to speak up and be like, hey, can you speak up as well? Make sure there's nothing else with elderly people. Yeah, so, and then the next one, moving on, is sexism. So this is basically, most of us know what this is, but this is prejudicial attitudes and beliefs based or on about women or men based on rigid beliefs on gender roles. So this might include that if you were to say that men are always insensitive, interested only in sex, and incapable of communicating their feelings, that is a sexist attitude towards someone. And sexist language is specifically language that puts people down because of their gender. So a couple, one thing that kind of goes with that is how we use man and guys. Now I know a lot of people, it doesn't bother them if we refer to someone like, hey man, or hey guys, but that's gendered language. It's specifically designated for men, and so it's not really inclusive of others. We also shouldn't use stereotypes. So a lot of times if I say, oh, they're a nurse, even though I did not attend, I said, there's a nurse. If I did not give indication of their gender, most likely in your head, you're going to assume that person is a female. Or a teacher. A lot of times you're going to think that they're a female. Or if I say doctor, you're probably going to think of a man. So that is kind of the kind of thinking that we need to challenge, because there's no real way to kind of pigeonhole everybody into a stereotype. So I want to quickly talk about some kind of terms that we use. And so I totally got it wrong earlier. I thought I had it right. I didn't. We should be less using the term elderly and more just older person. The term girl should refer to only very young females, and same with boy. You really shouldn't use that with people that are over the age of 18. It's kind of weird because they're not children, they're adults. And that's just, we should always refer to people by the pronouns that they want to go by, as well as the name that they want to go by. That's really important in confirming who they are as a person. One thing that I think, the one I want to add is that we should never use gay as an adjective unless we're describing a person. And it's obviously, and they are homosexual, but like when people say, that's so gay, well, that's not really how the word is supposed to be used, and it can be very offensive. So that is what we were talking about disconfirmation and confirmation and those kind of beliefs. So that's all we're gonna cover for chapter 5. So I will be posting the sheet up on your assignments, and I hope you learned a little bit more about kind of how we use verbal language and how to use it a little better.